it just provided the right thing at the right time. We'd come along with a very raw sort of music where everything was rather sweet. A new sort of tough element seemed to be growing up, and we provided a music that had the same sort of vitality, and we came along at the right time with the right thing. So it's just sort of, you know, happened.
Since they arrived on the popular music scene in 1963, few bands have managed to outplay, outperform, or outlast the Rolling Stones. The group that brought a sense of danger and excitement to rock and roll created a whirlwind of controversy throughout the 1960s, injecting raw power into their music and striking a far more aggressive pose than their contemporaries, the Beatles.
They can be the good guys, we'll be the bad guys in the black hats. That's the Rolling Stones, we're the bad guys in the black hats, right? We'll be the villains, because villains are far more interesting than the good guys, far more interesting than the heroes.
Not only did the Stones compose some of the landmark tracks of the era, they redefined white popular music, while their sexually fueled performances created hysteria across the globe.
When the Stones came on, they brushed aside everything that had been before, like matchsticks.
Jagger was quite happy to express that kind of sexuality in music, which certainly black artists had done, and very, very few English artists had ever attempted.
This programme presents a critical review of the Rolling Stones during their first creative period. A period in which 5 middle-class white youths managed to conquer the world. The 5 members of the first successful incarnation of the Rolling Stones were born in a wartime Britain with a remarkably conservative popular music scene. While that scene was shaken by the emergence of Elvis Presley and rock and roll, a wealth of black American music had also begun to make its way across the Atlantic. Bluesmen such as Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf and Jimmy Reed were to be the greatest influence on the young Stones, their raw and primal sound a world away from the conventions of popular music. In Dartford, England, Mick Jagger and his friend Dick Taylor, both students at Dartford Grammar School, were busy hunting for releases by these marginal figures and soaking up their revolutionary style.
When we first met, there was rock and roll had its sort of first outburst, I think, really, and was getting a little bit tame around the edges. And I think we both, I mean, I was into jazz and blues and things like that, and then we discovered rhythm, what was then called rhythm and blues, which is really sort of urban blues. It's sort of more like Muddy Waters and Elmore James, and then Chuck Berry. I mean, every time a new Chuck Berry record came out, it would definitely be, you know, he'd get an import or whatever. I mean, we all would, all the little trio or quartet of us who were at grammar school who really were into that sort of music.
So excited, I watch you look at her run. Oh, mommy, mommy, please may I go? There's such a sight to see, such a feel to show. Oh, daddy, daddy, I beg of you. I whisper to mommy, it's all right with you. 'Cause they'll be rocking on band.
With fellow Dartford boy Keith Richards, the three set up a blues band. Although blues was a relatively unknown and unpopular musical genre at the time, distinguished jazz players Cyril Davies and Alexis Corner had formed a blues band whose reputation was growing and whose residency at the London club The Marquee gave hope to fledgling bands countrywide.
The blues scene in London in the early 60s was very small, and there were very limited places that you could hear this music, so naturally everybody gravitated together. I mean, to get the records, you know, Mick Jagger was famously sending off to Chess Records in Chicago and getting them on mail order. So you felt part of a community if you were into this music. And Alexis Korner's band with Cyril Davis used to play on a Thursday night, I think it was, the Marquee. Every other night was a jazz night. There was one night a week where you could hear authentic blues music. And inevitably, Mick Jagger gravitated there, Brian Jones gravitated there, Charlie Watts sat in and played drums. So really, that is the roots of the Rolling Stones, and not just of the Rolling Stones, but the whole of the British blues and R&B movement.
We saw that Alexis Korner was playing in the Ealing Club, and we all bundled into Mick's dad's car and went down there a couple of times. Saw Alexis Korner, were very impressed for a couple of weeks, and then with all the sort of cockiness of youth, we said, oh, we could do this, we could be up there. And then we saw Brian Jones, and we were very impressed with Brian's slide playing, because he was like playing proper slide guitar with he had an acoustic with a pickup. I think he had a Martin. I think he already had his Martin with a pickup on it, and it just sounded so good. And we went and chatted to them, and that's how that all started.
While Jagger had become an erstwhile member of Alexis Korner's band Blues Incorporated, Brian Jones began to set up his own. He asked Keith Richards, Dick Taylor and Mick to rehearse with him and join the band. In July 1962, Jones's band replaced Blues Incorporated on the BBC's Jazz Club radio show. Asked for a name, they called themselves the Rolling Stones after a Muddy Waters track. Just over a week later, on the 21st of July 1962, the band made their debut live performance at the Marquee Club on Wardour Street.
I remember it quite well. I remember the audience reaction was kind of mixed, because I think there were a few people there who wanted to hear proper blues. I think there were quite a few people who really enjoyed it. I think it was quite a short set, but there were also people who sort of went, play blues, you know, you've got to play proper blues. But there you go, that's what it was like then. But we certainly all got quite a buzz out of it. I know the cleaner didn't like it. The cleaner said they'll never get anywhere.
Struggling to get further gigs, Dick Taylor left the band to be replaced by Bill Wyman. In 1963, they recruited drummer Charlie Watts and managed to secure a residency at the Crawdaddy Club in Richmond. The band quickly established themselves as an exciting live act, and they attracted the attention of Soho promoter Andrew Loog Oldham. A young, shrewd businessman, Oldham offered the Rolling Stones a 3-year management deal, and they subsequently signed to Decca Records. In May 1963, the band went to Olympic Studios to record their first release, a cover of the Chuck Berry track Come On. It would go on to reach number 21 in the UK singles chart.
Everything is wrong since me and my baby party. All day long I'm walking cause I couldn't get my car started. Later from my job and I can't afford to check it. I wish somebody come along and run into it and wreck it. Come on, since me and my baby party. Come on, I can't get started. Come on, I can't afford to check it. I wish somebody come along and run into it and wreck it.
When they started recording, they didn't have any of their own songs. Mick and Keith were not writing at this point, so they didn't have that Lennon and McCartney source of material that the Beatles had. And they were struggling as to what should be the first single, and basically they trawled through all their record collections and tried various things, and they came up with this fairly obscure Chuck Berry song.
I really want to see you out. Don't mean maybe I'm doing everything trying to make you see that I belong to you, honey, you belong to me. Come on.
In fact, it's only 1 minute 45 seconds long, which is very short even by the standards of the time, when radio formatting required you to come in at probably something around 2.5 minutes. And I think what happened was they were so excited when they recorded it, they just played it at such a pace that it was intended to come in at 2.5 minutes, and it came in at 45 seconds less than that. They gave it a very pop treatment, really, which is why both Jagger and Keith Richards subsequently more or less disowned it. They wouldn't play the song live, and Andrew Oldham famously had to bully them into playing it live, because you couldn't go out and gig and not play your current single.
It certainly contains about one of the corniest sort of key changes you ever heard, you know, for the last verse. But it was a means to an end. I mean, it hovered between 20 and 30 in the charts and sold well over a long period. Although the Stones themselves dropped it from their act, you know, like a sort of gangrene leg.
Come on, I want to see you, baby, come on. I don't mean maybe, come on.
I thought Come On was a bit of an odd choice of a Chuck Berry number for the Stones to do. Didn't quite, you know, it sounded a little to me at the time like slightly watered down Stones. And obviously in between leaving them and then bringing out Come On, we'd seen them quite a few times. I'd seen them several times, and I thought, yeah, they really, you know, what they were doing in clubs was absolutely brilliant. And I don't think it was reflected with Come On.
Despite 2 TV appearances, it was felt by many that the band had not translated their live performance well on their debut, and they struggled to find another record to cover that could give them a bona fide hit.
It was a real problem getting the live feel onto vinyl. And the next record was problematical in itself, because Oldham at that time was looking for other people's songs that they could adapt and make hit records out of. And he couldn't find a track, a song at that time. I think they tried Poison Ivy or something for a while, and that didn't work out in the studio. They were rehearsing numbers and trying to find something along the lines the way he'd found Come On with them, which was like, give me your 5 most commercial tracks. And it wasn't working. They couldn't come up with anything. And Oldham left Studio 51 in some sense of depression, I think, and started walking back to his office in wherever it was, New Oxford Street, that area. And as he was walking down the road, and this is the kind of I guess those accidents that happen are turning points. He saw John Lennon and Paul McCartney getting out of a cab coming from the Variety Club Luncheon Awards. Lennon, I think, spotted him and waved him over to come and say hello. He sort of said, you know, you look a bit down in the dumps, Andrew, what's wrong? And Andrew told him the situation, you know. I think probably hoping he might come up with a solution. And of course, Lennon said, yeah, we think we might have something for you. And they went back to Studio 51 and they showed them how to play I Want to Be Your Man.
I want to be your lover, baby. I want to be your man. I want to be your lover, baby. I want to be your man. Tell me that you love me, baby. Tell me you understand. Tell me that you love me, baby. Tell me you understand. I want to be your man. I want to be your man. I want to be your man. I want to be your man.
I Want to Be Your Man was the Stones' second single, and that did better in the charts. That got up to number 12, and of course they had a helping hand. It was actually written by Lennon and McCartney, so the Beatles kind of donated this track to them. And that was the first example, really, of this kind of friendship between the Stones and Beatles. It wasn't really so much a rivalry as a kind of... they're all great mates, I think, so it was nice to see the Beatles had a song to spare, and they were the gods, of course, already by 64, 63. So it was a nice gesture for them to hand over this song to the Stones, which gave them a leg up into the charts. the Stones with Charlie Watts pounding the drums and Bill Wyman's bass, a great rhythm section, by the way, ensured that whatever the Stones did to a Beatles song, it was going to be very much a Stones power treatment. And of course their fans appreciated that. It was a bonus, really. You got two bands for the price of one, so a wonderful hit record.
Well, interestingly, I mean, the Stones didn't do I Want to Be Your Man for very long after it came out. I mean, once it actually achieved its purpose of getting them into the top 20, I mean, I think that they sort of weren't particularly keen on carrying on with it. I mean, it's never reared up again in any of their live performances, either then or now. I mean, often songs do. I mean, only a few years ago they were doing Not Fade Away, but, you know, certainly I Want to Be Your Man. I mean, you know, it was just a very necessary strategy, I suppose, to get higher into the charts and come on.
Although not a perennial Stones favourite, I Wanna Be Your Man gave the band the public recognition that they needed. But it was still their renowned live show that attracted the most attention and the most favourable reviews. And as they embarked on their second tour of the UK, they drew new fans to every show.
Well, the Stones right away were much more of a live attraction, really. I mean, the Beatles stopped touring quite early on, and when you did go and see them, it was almost impossible to hear them because of all the screaming. So we did have the chance to see the Stones playing in small clubs in London, in the south, in the same way that fans in Liverpool would have seen the Beatles at the Cavern. At least we had the chance to see the Stones playing in small venues.
I've always thought that rock and roll basically is something that you can't actually talk about too much in a sense of trying to convey what the feeling is, because it's an emotional feeling, it's a gut feeling. And the Stones had it. They got you there in the stomach. You could actually feel that there was something about this band that was different from anything else that was going on at the time.
Obviously, Mick Jagger was one of the first performers to really move on stage, and although maybe if you look at old film clips now, maybe he doesn't seem as active and as vibrant as he maybe is now. You know, he's learnt a few more moves since 1964, but right from the start, whether Mick was just shaking the maracas and, you know, they were a much more volatile, visible kind of active live performance.
They had a great act. My opinion of Jagger is the biggest and finest frontman there is. He's a great frontman. I mean, to say, you work out, when you talk about Jagger, you talk about Tom Jones, the Elvis Presley, you all got, they was all doing the same. But to me, Jagger done it better.
Jagger's frenetic live performance was something that he'd been developing since his early days in Dartford, an amalgamation of the exaggerated movements of Presley, Bo Diddley and James Brown.
I think Mick just had this energy, and he was totally transformed, because he was not a loud person, but as soon as he got a microphone in his hand, he just sort of suddenly something went off in his head, and off he went, doing his thing and dancing about and making up words to La Bamba or what have you. All this stuff about Tina Turner showing him how to dance. He actually used to dance every time he sang, and my mum used to poke her head round the door and sort of be secretly watching him dance and sort of giggling in the corner, because he put on a show, even when there was, as far as he was concerned, there was no one to put on a show for.
As the band's success grew, their live audience became much larger and much younger. With the adulation of millions of young teenage girls, this new fan base would bring new complications.
At first, you could guarantee the first 4 rows of those seats in the cinema were soaking wet when they peed themselves. Oh, it's unbelievable. Like mass hysteria. They used to go berserk. With hysteria, they'd go berserk. He used to pee himself. But, all those seats, the first 2 or 3 rows were soaking wet. Because one manager, when we were about a dressing, he was telling me about it. She was joking, and she, you come with me. And I actually went outside before we split. And I felt they were soaking wet. Incredible, really, to get in that state. But that was the Stones for you.
1964 was a busy year for the band, in which they would record more than 50 separate tracks. In February, the band released a single that deviated from their blues and R&B repertoire. Not Fade Away, previously a hit for Buddy Holly, became the band's real breakthrough success, and although the track may have been a surprising choice for some, for Dick Taylor it was a reminder of his and Jagger's early influences.
One of the first things that myself and my friend Robert Beckwith and Mick as well, because we're all in school together, we really liked Buddy Holly.
I love you, Peggy Sue, with my love so very true. Oh, Peggy, my Peggy Sue.
You know, we liked rock and roll. There was a very big relationship between rock, you know, why do I need to say it? I mean, everybody knows rock and roll was kind of came out of black music. Little Richard was big pals with Buddy Holly. Buddy Holly did Bo Diddley. You know, it was all part of the same scene. And he was great. I mean, he was such a good performer, Buddy Holly. And we really liked, we went to see him. And we were all very taken by him and the Crickets. Like, the drummer was really good, I remember that. And I think Not Fade Away was, it just stuck somehow.
I want to tell you how it's gonna be. You're gonna give your love to me. I want to love you night and day. Well, you know my love and I fade away.
The Stones' influences weren't merely blues, simply because the people they idolised influences weren't entirely blues either. Because, for example, Chuck Berry's first hit, Maybelline, owed as much to country and western as it did to blues. And, you know, in the same way as Buddy Holly, I mean, he came from very much a country and western territory in the States, you know, down in Texas and New Mexico. You know, they were certainly able to actually latch on to other genres and sort of impregnate them with their own personality.
I want to tell you how it's gonna be. You're gonna give your love to me. Love to last more than one day. Well, love is love and I'll fade away.
The great thing about the Stones in that early incarnation as an R&B group, a beat group, was that although everything they were doing was copied from somewhere else, inevitably it came out different, and that's what made them unique. I mean, Keith Richards once said to me, I asked him to define what the Rolling Stones sound was, and his answer was, well, we tried to sound like Chuck Berry, but we couldn't because we came from Dartford, so it came out wrong, and that became the Rolling Stones sound. What they did with Not Fade Away was in a way even cleverer, because they took this Buddy Holly song and then they bolted onto it Bo Diddley beat, one of their favourite artists. And in a way, this is what any kind of new music is. It's taking elements of existing music and putting them together in a way that hasn't been done before, and that's how you create something new. And that's exactly what they did with Not Fade Away. I can't think of anybody else at that time other than the Rolling Stones who would have taken a Buddy Holly song and put a Bo Diddley beat on it.
Not Fade Away became the Stones' first British top 10 hit and signalled a turning point in the band's career. Chart success and studio performance finally matching their impressive live show. April '64, the band released their first British album, an eponymous collection of blues and R&B covers that also featured the band's first original, the ballad Tell Me. The LP was an overwhelming commercial success.
I'm still very fond of the first Rolling Stones album because it seemed a perfect record in many ways. It had a great cover photograph of the Stones, David Bailey picture. Very tasteful, actually probably one of the last tasteful Rolling Stones album covers, I always think. And little notes by Andrew Oldham, and the whole thing I think was probably recorded in a basement in Denmark Street, Southern Sound Studios, I believe it was. No, Regent Sound Studios it was called, which later became a rock and roll bookshop, which is rather appropriate. Loads of bands used to record in this rather cramped and confined basement, and yet somehow the atmosphere on that first recording, although people would think now maybe it sounds a little bit primitive and simplistic, yet there's still that atmosphere on it. There's the same kind of vibe that you got on the original American blues recordings, R&B recordings, that simplicity and echoing feel to it all. I think that enhances the music in a way. So it gives the drums and the bass and the guitars that extra bite, and you also get the sense of a new, young, fresh band really enjoying themselves, actually getting off on what they're doing.
Not only was it, you know, exciting music, but it actually sort of created a new attitude towards albums, because interesting enough, unlike the Beatles, there were no... The Stones didn't put any of their hits on the album. And it was the idea that an album doesn't have to be a throwaway collection of tracks to sort of demonstrate the artist's versatility, you know, all hinged on a hit single. Because, I mean, essentially an album used to be a sort of excuse for getting teenagers to buy the same record over and over again. You buy an album, the first track would be whatever the hit was, probably that gave the album its title, and the rest would be, you know, unoriginal originals and sort of, you know, hits by other artists done their way, that sort of thing. But, I mean, you know, it showed that an album could be actually something in its own right.
By releasing cover versions of material by artists that had influenced them, with this first album and with their other covers, the Stones were bringing obscure musicians and songs to a wider audience.
The first album is really a showcase for their music. You know, I mean, it's their playlist. It's them saying, if you liked this pop single, really, go and check out where it's coming from. Go and listen to Jimmy Reed, go and listen to Bo Diddley, go and listen to Muddy Waters. And they've taken a lot of stick over the years for having stolen from the blues, from having ripped off R&B tunes and so on and so forth. But I think probably on balance, they've done as much for those artists as they took for them.
I think it was great that the Stones and, you know, the other R&B bands, hopefully even us, included, well, hopefully definitely us included, brought the music which we liked to the attention of more people. Because, I mean, I've talked to people in America. I've talked to one guy, he said I forget who he was he listened to, and he said, oh yeah, I heard this guy, and it was John Lee Hooker. And he said, I discovered he lived a block away from me, and I never heard of him. And people saying, Howlin' Wolf, you know, we'd never heard of these people. And that's what I think was one of the most important things which happened. That you know, hopefully we did expose this sort of music to more people than maybe would have heard it otherwise.
Blues. I thought he was fantastic.
The Stones' promotion of American roots music would continue throughout this period, and in 1965 they honoured one hero, Howlin' Wolf, by insisting that the blues musician be booked with them to appear on the NBC show Shindig.
Tell us something about him, Brian.
Well, when we first started playing together, we started playing because we wanted to play rhythm and blues, and Howlin' Wolf was one of our greatest idols, and it's a great pleasure to find you being booked on this show tonight. It really is a pleasure.
Thanks to Howlin' Jackson.
So I think it's about time you shut up and we had Howlin' Wolf on stage.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Let's get him on. Howlin' Wolf, bring him on. How many more years since I have to let you dog me around? How
retrospect, what the Stones did in helping promote what were actually rather obscure records from the States was a good thing, because it helped to expose what might have been a lost culture in America. America has a habit of producing all this wonderful music, whether it's New Orleans jazz or whether it's swing music or bebop. You know, in the white heat of their innovation, all too quickly it becomes lost and forgotten in their own country. And of course, with the setup in America during the 50s and 60s, where you'd have quite strong segregation in terms of music. It actually called it race records at one time. And it was, the 60s were a time when black artists were starting to be recognised and developing their own record labels, for example, Tamla Motown. But that was quite a slow process, whereas I think the Stones and the Beatles too, in their championing of great artists, they could hear who the great singers really were. I'm sure Mick and Paul McCartney as well, great singers though they were in their own way, they were emulating what they'd heard from America. So it was good that what they'd done was very respectful, I think, and very important in introducing to the whole world this great treasure chest of American music.
In June '64, the Stones began their first American tour, attracting praise and derision in equal measure. During their travels in the States, the band flew to Chicago to Chess Records, home of blues and R&B heroes such as Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry. Here they recorded several tracks, including their next single, a cover of Bobby Womack's It's All Over Now. It would become their first US Top 40 single.
Say, aren't those Rolling Stones really something? Hey, how do you like that hair, you know? They make the Beatles look like Yul Brynner. Hey, you know, England must have socialized haircuts. Hey, if all the singing groups in England would put their heads together, they could start a dandruff plantation. So anyhow, here they are, ladies and gentlemen, the Rolling Stones singing It's All Over Now.
Stay out all night long. She made me cry. She done me wrong. She hurt my eyes open. That's no lie. Tables turning now. Her time to cry. Because I used to love her, but it's all over now. Because I used to love her.
Andrew knew the American market. Again, he picked up very quickly on what they would go for and what they might not go for. And he sensed that this was the kind of pop song, almost, that they were looking for, whereas they might not go for something too ethnic R&B, because after all, this is the home of Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry and all these guys. And they weren't going to get time on the black stations doing that kind of stuff because they got the originals. They certainly weren't going to appeal to the white audience who decided that the rhythm and blues was black music, right? So Bobby Womack very nicely kind of crossed that bridge. He was black artist, but it wasn't kind of like ethnic rhythm and blues we're talking about here. It was a hit song. Andrew knew that when he heard it, and knew that this was absolutely right for the American market, and it gave them their foothold in the States.
Because I used to love her, but it's all over now. Because I used to love her, but it's all over now.
I mean, what a fabulous track. And if you play it alongside the Valentino's version, again, the Rolling Stones bring something totally unique to it. And throughout that period, when they were covering other people's songs, I don't think you can accuse them of merely copying anything. I mean, everything they covered, they brought their own unique Rolling Stones brand to it.
On the back of the single's success, the band travelled to the Netherlands to play a one-off gig. As soon as the band went on stage, the crowd erupted and a violent and chaotic riot ensued. Questions were asked about the Stones' influence, and the band, who Andrew Oldham had crafted as the anti-Beatles, found the controversy around them rising. From the very start, the Stones had been sold as the bad boys of rock and roll, and the hysteria that they created in their wake was becoming the concern of an international adult population.
More so than the Beatles, in fact, far more so than the Beatles, the Stones were a V sign at the idea that a gentleman's name should only appear in the newspaper when he was born, when he was baptised, when he was married and when he died. You know, the people were doing extraordinary things in those days, and it was a kind of breakout from that sort of post-war austerity.
Andrew saw the gap that the Beatles had left. He saw that sort of left field gap that the Beatles had left behind them, you know, and he filled it. They rushed into it head first. They said, right, okay, they can be the good guys, we'll be the bad guys in the black hats. That's the Rolling Stones, we're the bad guys in the black hats, right? We'll be the villains, because villains are far more interesting than the good guys, far more interesting than the heroes, you know? And, I mean, they weren't real bad guys any more than any other youngsters were of that particular age. You know, they just happened to, you know, do things in public, shall we say, that perhaps we wouldn't normally have expected of them. I mean, while the Beatles were getting their OBE, the Stones were pissing on a petrol pump.
The Stones started to sort of do things like, you know, refuse to go on the sort of revolving stage at the end of their performance on Sunday night at the London Palladium, for example. And I mean, Andrew Loog Oldham actively encouraged this sort of attitude. He actually encouraged them to sort of use swear words in interview, to sort of be very frank about drugs and sex, and generally to sort of wind up grown-ups. I mean, it's good basic psychology. You know, if you can annoy adults, then you're bound to be a hit with their children.
It was partly a publicity stunt. It was also a feeling, I think, that you have to remember with the Stones, they went through an awful lot of shit. They went through an awful lot of, like, oh, get your long hair. You washed, you had a bath, you got fleas, you smell a bit. Funny first time, maybe? Not when you've travelled around the world about twice and had the same thing in every country you go to. And they weren't nasty, smelly, horrible people that didn't wash. In fact, it took more trouble looking after the long hair than it did looking after your hair cut short like a punk or something, you know? And after they'd soaked up some of that punishment, they started to think, well, you know, I ain't going to stand for it anymore. Let's give a bit of it back. So a part of that rebellious stance came from a natural frustration and anger with the way that they were treated by some of the establishment at the time. A resentment, if you like, that they weren't allowed to do certain things and were chastised for speaking their mind.
In October, the band began a second US tour and travelled to RCA Studios in Los Angeles to record new material. With the next British single release, Little Red Rooster, the band chose to return to their blues roots. Originally a Willie Dixon song written for Howling Wolf, it brought Brian Jones's guitar playing to the fore.
I am the little red rooster, too lazy to crow for day.
Little Red Rooster is certainly my favourite rhythm and blues track the Stones have ever done. I think it's a beautiful version. I love it. It caused enormous problems in the Rolling Stones camp because Andrew Oldham's partner in crime, Tony Calder, hated it and said if they did it, it was going to do exactly what I've said, which is in a way it's regressive and it's going to take them back into that rhythm and blues slot, and nobody's going to believe that they're something new and special. And Tony, in many ways, was right. But Andrew sensed that now the time was right for them to take a risk and to do something that they loved, because they built up a steady growing reputation, fan base, record buyers that would buy almost anything that the Rolling Stones were going to do. And he said, no, it's going to establish us in a kind of quality way with the rhythm and blues people, you know, and it's going to be a huge hit. And Andrew was right again. Vroom, #1.
Keep everything in the formula, upset in every way. The dogs begin to bark, hounds begin to howl.
I was delighted when Little Red Rooster came out, because it absolutely encapsulated, you know, what I liked. I think that Brian was, well, he was obviously very important to Little Red Rooster. And I think it was for him probably the sort of point where it was when the Stones were doing what he would have liked them to have always been. In fact, I'm sure it was.
Little Red Rooster was in many ways Brian Jones's finest hour. I mean, were he alive today, and if we could ask him which of those early Stones records was he the proudest of, I think he would probably tell you Little Red Rooster, because it was pure blues, it wasn't R&B, it wasn't rock and roll, it wasn't pop. It was pretty close to that Chicago blues sound that he loved so much.
Watch out, strange camp people. Little Red Rooster's on the prowl.
Even people that don't like the Rolling Stones, some of my friends who don't like the Rolling Stones music, like the early Little Red Rooster stuff that they, oh, I like that. Something about it, you know, it's that rhythm and that beat, you know. Very earthy, very primeval stuff, but that's what the blues is.
I mean, what a triumph to take a song written by Willie Dixon for Howling Wolf, to give it that absolutely authentic, raw Chicago blues treatment and have a #1 hit single with it. Fantastic.
I am the Little Red Rooster, baby. Too late. The trophy day.
Jagger again has found a different voice. It's progressed one step further from the voice that he found on Not Fade Away and It's All Over Now. And although it's a blues voice, it's not a blues voice. It's Mick Jagger's voice we're listening to now. It's a kind of this nasal whine, but it works. Nobody sounds like Mick Jagger. Nobody ever will again either. You've only got to hear Mick Jagger doing the backing vocals on Out of Time for Chris Farlow, and you know that's Mick Jagger singing in the background, no matter how many times they try to persuade Decca Records he wasn't on it.
I don't think Mick Jagger's a great singer at all, but what it is Mick Jagger, isn't it? You can hear a song and you go, it's Mick Jagger. He's instantly identifiable. So whether somebody like it or someone doesn't, you couldn't say, I can't say he's not a good singer, but to my ears, I don't think he's a great singer, but you can't fail to know it's a Mick Jagger, you know, it's Mick Jagger's vocals. Maybe that does make him a good singer, I don't know. It's like Rod Stewart, you know, some people hate his voice, you know, but you know it's Rod Stewart. And then you got, if you ask me like Bono, is he a good singer? He's got the most unidentifiable voice ever. You go, how's that then? So, instantly recognisable rather than good. It's my humble opinion on Mick Jagger.
1965, and the Stones started the year with the release of a second UK album, The Rolling Stones #2.
Rolling Stones #2 was a consolidation, I think, of Rolling Stones #1. I mean, it had a similar cover. It just had a picture of the Stones with no sort of explanation of who they were on it. There was a slightly larger percentage of Jagger Richards originals on it. And there was also a tendency to go towards, sort of make irresistible concessions to mainstream pop. I mean, there was a version of Under the Boardwalk on that by the Drifters, which was released as a single in Australia, and it was a big hit over there. But I mean, at the same time, you know, they still stuck to their blues roots.
Yeah, the second album followed a similar pattern to the first. What I would have loved them to have done is to release an album of all the material they recorded at Chess. Some of it has still never come out. Some of it came out on EP. Some of it came out a track here, a track there. And I counted up once, and I think they recorded 13 or 14 tracks at Chess, and something like 9 of them have come out. And it would have been very interesting to have heard an album, a whole album that had that cohesion that had been recorded at the Chess Studios in Chicago.
I mean, the albums weren't that great, were they? You know, right up to, I suppose, Aftermath's a great album. That's more like, you know, the main album Brian plays on. I think they got into that. England always had great bands, singles bands. You know, they've always been far more than America's ever been able to do. You know, we've had great singles bands, and sometimes the albums ain't that great. Look at Queen, great singles band, rubbish albums. Slade, wouldn't even know what a Slade album sounds like, but great singles, you know. And the Stones were that great, in that great British tradition of being able to write single after single and getting better and better and better.
I don't think they really were thinking very seriously about albums at this stage. The Rolling Stones were a singles band. Until 1966, 67, they were very much a singles band, and that's where the pressure was to get that next 45, and the album wasn't the object that it subsequently became.
That the majority of Stones releases so far had been cover versions was something that Andrew Oldham sought to change. Forcing Richards and Jagger to write their own material had produced a handful of songs so far, but in February they released their first UK single that was an original composition, The Last Time.
They'd started writing songs under pressure from Andrew Oldham. I think the first song they wrote they gave to Gene Pitney, and he recorded As Tears Go By, Marianne Faithfull recorded. But it took them a little while to come up with something that was strong enough to go head-to-head with Lennon and McCartney and the Beatles as a single.
Well, I told you once and I told you twice, but you never listen to my advice. Don't try very hard to please me, but what you know it should be there. Well, this could be the last time, this could be the last time, maybe the last time, I don't know. Oh no, oh no.
The Last Time was was a bit of a sort of personal triumph for Mick and Keith, because it was the first A-side they'd written for the Stones, the first one that all the group had accepted as a sound A-side, although it was a bit derivative. It was derived from a gospel item called This Could Be the Last Time, which was popularised in 1963 by the 5 Blind Boys of Mississippi. I mean, it wasn't a very obvious plagiarism. It certainly wouldn't be noticed by the sort of common record-buying public, you know, who I shouldn't imagine are particularly regular consumers of the 5 Blind Boys of Mississippi.
This could be the last time, maybe the last time, I don't know. Oh no, oh no. Well, I told you once and I told you twice.
It was a great production, it was a great record. When I first heard it, I was actually in Paris with them. I flew to Paris for one of the tours for the NME. They were at the Paris Olympia, and they played. I went to the sound check, and they played the last time. I'd never heard it. I think that was the real turning point for me with the Stones, because I heard this song. I thought, where the hell have they got that from? That's amazing. You know, who's written that? Where's that cover version come from? So I went and asked Mick afterwards. Of course, got the sardonic. We wrote it. You know, but he was pleased that I thought that they hadn't, and it was I said, well, it's a fantastic number. Congratulations, it's going to be a huge hit.
Well, this could be the last time. This could be the last time. Maybe the last time. I don't know. Oh no. Oh no. No.
The Stones were on a roll. The Last Time was their third British #1 single and their first US top 10. In April, they returned to America for their third tour of the States and once again booked into the RCA studios in Los Angeles. What resulted from these sessions was a track that would come to define 1960s popular music and would be acknowledged as one of the greatest anthems ever written, Satisfaction.
Satisfaction, probably one of the greatest singles of all time. Certainly, I asked Mick Jagger, I interviewed him on the occasion of Keith Richards' 60th birthday for a sort of special tribute to Keith. And I asked him what was the greatest riff Keith had ever come up with, and he had absolutely no hesitation in saying, well, it's got to be Satisfaction, it doesn't come any better than that. But again, Satisfaction is an example of this process of songwriting where, you know, you take a bit from here and a bit from there, and you don't even necessarily know where it's come from. I mean, the story is, well-known story, that Keith woke up in the middle of the night with this riff, and he played it to Jagger the next morning. They were on tour in Clearwater in Florida. He played it, I think, sitting around the swimming pool, and Mick wrote the words. But Keith then had this terrible moment where he thought he'd stolen the riff from somewhere, and he thought perhaps it was from Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, and he wasn't entirely convinced of the originality of what they'd done. And in fact, they recorded it twice. They recorded the song in Chicago, and I've never heard that version. It'd be very interesting to hear it. They weren't satisfied with that. They then recut it a couple of days later, I think, in LA. But they then had a vote on whether to release this song as a single, and Andrew Oldham was convinced, quite rightly so, that here was a #1 single. And Keith didn't want it released as a single, partly because he wasn't convinced that the riff was original. Mick wasn't convinced by it, and Jagger and Richards actually voted against the track being released. Fortunately, they were outvoted by Brian Jones, Bill Wyman, and Charlie Watts, and with Andrew Oldham, that made 4 against 2. So the single came out, and of course, the rest is history.
There is a strong, aggressive streak that runs through Satisfaction. I remember the first time I heard it, it was like sort of song that you don't want to hear stopping somehow. It's like a big power surge. And the fact that it's played on BBC Radio, I think after a few protests, made it all the more exciting. People were saying, have you heard Satisfaction? You know, it's like, you've got to hear it. So people were talking about it. Before I'd actually heard it, everybody was talking about this record. And I mean, that's the kind of buzz you don't get now, is it, really? People actually talking about a record before the vast mass of the public had even heard it.
In 1965, you walked around cities and all over the world, and all you could hear was Satisfaction playing, you know. I mean, it just was one of those records that pervaded everything and everybody at that time. Wonderful drum sound. The band's finest hour, probably, on vinyl.
Satisfaction was just superb. I mean, you know, it was the sort of record you felt like, hey, I should have made that, you know. It's just so good. I think the riff was just, you know, was just alarmingly good.
I love Keith Richards. He's a lovely guy, but he's also, I like his guitar playing because he's come up with some of the great riffs. It's a great song. It's the sort of song that you would never believe that was written by a white, middle-class English guy, you know. The early stuff, of course, is when they were copying other people and learning their songs, you know. Little Red Rooster was a particular. But when they became a little bit more into it and writing their stuff, like Lennon and McCartney, Jagger, Richards, they were writing some lovely stuff, you know.
Not only did Satisfaction strike a chord with the public musically, its lyrics also tapped directly into the mindset of the growing youth culture, and this gave it a wider cultural significance.
I think there are two things happening with Satisfaction. One is obviously the sexual content of the lyric, the innuendo, which comes from the blues. I mean, blues lyrics are absolutely drenched in the most filthy, disgusting references, if you understand the code. So there was that, but also by this time, 1965, you have got the beginnings of a counterculture, the beginnings of a youth movement that is typified by some of the songs that Bob Dylan has started writing, by records like My Generation, by The Who. There is this generational sea change going on, and the Rolling Stones have become very much part of that. They become almost figureheads of it because they were the bad boys. You know, they were the kind, you know, you could imagine them down on the beach with the modern rockers joining in the fight, which you probably couldn't imagine the Beatles doing. So they very much became associated with this long-haired youth rebellion, counterculture, although that's probably a phrase that comes along a little bit later. And I think that is present in Satisfaction, and then but it joins, the beauty of it is it fuses with this great blues tradition of the sexual lyric and the innuendo.
Satisfaction reached #1 on both sides of the Atlantic, and the Stones were now part of a musical and cultural holy trinity, along with the Beatles and Bob Dylan. In September '65, they released their third album, Out of Our Heads.
That album just reinforces the point about how we were still living in a culture that revolved around the single. The album doesn't really become an important artifact in popular music until around 66, 67. I mean, Dylan is the catalyst there, probably. But you know, more time and effort probably went into the selection and the writing and the recording of a single than went into the whole of some of those early Rolling Stones albums.
I don't think much on Out of Our Heads. Many of the originals were particularly strong songs. They weren't particularly bad either. They were just sort of good, solid material, really, that sort of stood up as an album track, although, you know, some of them were released as singles, like Heart of Stone, for example. But I mean, you know, I think that Jagger and Richards were still kind of finding their way as songwriters, and this would come to fruition on the next album, Aftermath.
The Rolling Stones were now a household name due to the success of Satisfaction, and they were rushed into writing and recording a follow-up. Released barely a month after Satisfaction hit the top spot in Britain, Get Off of My Cloud similarly went to #1 both in the US and at home.
By this time, they are being required to churn out singles at an astonishing pace. I mean, we look at it today and it seems remarkable, but at the time it wasn't. This was merely what you did. This was the expectation. The album was not so important, but what was absolutely vital was that as soon as one single started dropping down the charts, the next one came along. And so there's enormous pressure on Jagger and Richards, who by this stage have started writing the hit singles. And how do you follow a song like Satisfaction? You know, I mean, top that, you can't. They came up with Get Off of My Cloud. I think Jagger thinks that that was the lyric he wrote that was most influenced by Dylan. He'd started listening to Dylan heavily at that time, and I think that you can hear a conscious effort to tap into that kind of Dylan-esque lyric.
I was sick and tired, fed up with this, and decided to take a drive downtown. It was so very quiet and peaceful, there was nobody, not a soul around.
It sort of got to the stage of rock and roll anthems. They got to that point where they weren't really taking that much from root, rhythm and blues, or anywhere else, actually. They suddenly found their own voice, their own sound, their own identity. And that's what you were going to get now.
Despite the band's overwhelming success, divisions internally were causing friction unseen by the public. Brian Jones, who had started as the driving force behind the band, was becoming marginalised. Unable to compete with the Jagger-Richards songwriting partnership, he found himself with less to do musically and was becoming increasingly unreliable and unstable.
He could be lovable, very polite, very nice, but he could be a bastard. One time, they'd do their gig and leave a note for him, play so much on so-and-so on that track of that and don't do this. Now, where are you going? He'd do it on his own. But then, of course, by that time I knew anyway that there was a lot of animosity going on. But unfortunately, Brian, he got in such a state, he just couldn't get it together, he couldn't hack it. He just could not do it. He fell apart.
Brian Jones was in many ways the leader of the group initially. He was the one who was on a mission to take this blues music and proselytize it to a new audience. And he's subsequently been slightly written out of the story. I mean, I don't think it suits either Mick or Keith to give Brian Jones the due that he probably deserves in that earlier period. I mean, when we get to a later period, he's clearly become a marginal figure. But I don't think you can understate how important he was in that early period. I mean, as a slide guitarist, as a harmonica player, as a source of the repertoire as well. I don't think Mick and Keith had heard Jimmy Reed until Brian Jones played them a Jimmy Reed record, and Jimmy Reed was a huge influence on the early Stones. So yes, I mean, let's not underestimate Brian Jones's contribution to the origins of the Rolling Stones.
I always had a funny feeling with Brian Jones that he was in the wrong band. I always thought that in a strange way Brian Jones should have been in the Beatles and John Lennon should have been in the Rolling Stones. And maybe both of them would still be alive today.
See, Brian, very funny really. He had so many people around him. Some were good, some were bad, some were leeches, you know. But he couldn't bear to be on his own. To me, although he had all these people around him, he was a very lonely man. That's my opinion of Brian. Because sometimes he used to talk to me, and I could feel he was hurting, you know. But as I say, he all had his friends around, the people around him, but he was still a lonely man.
The private problems of the Rolling Stones were kept far from the public eye, however, and in February 1966 the band released another single, 19th Nervous Breakdown. Recorded only months after Get Off My Cloud, the Stones were again proving that they could write hits on demand, and this latest release peaked at number 2 on both sides of the Atlantic.
I think, you know, Get Off My Cloud was a development of Satisfaction. I don't think it was a step backwards at all. And it was the same, I think, with 19th Nervous Breakdown, though in fact what they were planning to do on, you know, for the single after Get Off My Cloud was to revive their own As Tears Go By. But instead that was relegated to the B-side, and I think it was a very good idea as well. I think it would have been a big mistake to do that.
Oldham played it to me in a hotel one afternoon on the cassette, and I didn't get it, to be honest. I didn't always get it. I knew it was going to be a hit because, I mean, if the Stones had recorded Bar Bar Black Sheep at the time, it would have been a hit, you know. And I thought it had something going for it. I liked it more the more I heard it, but initially it didn't grab me.
What's interesting about 19th Nervous Breakdown is you can see a new style of songwriting emerging here, I think. Ray Davies is always held up as the great English songwriter of the mid-60s period who was able to create these sort of social vignettes. But actually, Jagger and Richards were up there with him, and it's there on 19th Nervous Breakdown. They then started writing songs like Mother's Little Helper, you know, and these songs of quite astute social observation. And it's something really that I don't think they've ever had the credit for. As I say, everybody talks about Ray Davies, but you know, there is a batch of songs that the Stones wrote, and that's one of them that are really up there in a similar category.
In April 1966, the Stones released their breakthrough album. Aftermath, entirely made up of original material, would become a landmark in popular music.
That was a great album. I mean, I think Aftermath was, again, that kind of identification that the Stones eventually got of themselves. You know, they'd found their own voice, they'd found their own sound, they'd found their own songs by that stage. You know, then they were actually doing what we talked about, which was putting away the rhythm and blues stuff that they used as their base and adapted for their own purposes, and actually got themselves an identity all of their own that owed nothing to Muddy Waters, Howling Wolf or Bo Diddley, really. They did owe something because they got inspiration from them, you know, but at the same time what they were actually recording and writing had nothing to do with them. This was of their time, the way they felt about how things were and how things should be and could be, but aren't. And I think that's the kind of feeling you get from Aftermath.
Aftermath was the Rolling Stones album of the 60s, as far as I'm concerned, anyway. It was a big breakthrough because it was all Jagger Richard originals, and I think everybody was working at full capacity there, because after that, I mean, Brian, for example, lost interest, and more or less, you know, by about 1968, he just confined himself to playing rhythm guitar, or not even turning up at sessions. But I mean, one of the elements, one of the strongest elements of Aftermath is the way Brian adds power to the originals by his sort of weaving of quaint instrumentation into their fabric. I mean, it's like, you know, a dulcimer on Lady Jane, or a sitar on Mother's Little Helper, and a sort of vibraphones on Under My Thumb.
My sweet Lady Jane, when I see you again, your servant am I, and will humbly remain. Just heed this plea, my love, unbend.
If anything, I think they probably put too much onto Aftermath. You know, you're talking about, you know, 16 tracks or something like that. And I mean, you know, perhaps there was a feeling that they weren't actually ever going to record another album again, you know, because they put so much onto it.
A month after the album's release, a new anthem was unleashed on the world. With Paint It Black, Jagger and Richards confirmed the talent displayed in earlier compositions. Not since Satisfaction had a Stones track had so much impact, and by moving away from their blues roots, the band proved that they could conquer new musical territory.
I see a red door and I want it painted black. No colors anymore, I want them to turn black. I see the girls go by dressed in their soft clothes. I have to turn my head until my darkness goes.
I think it's one of those happy accidents, you know. I mean, when they went in to record that song, they had no conception of how it was going to come out. And again, it's a record where you hear Brian Jones at his very, very best, because there are all sorts of little touches in there, the sitar and so on, that you know, are pure Brian Jones, and it's an example of how important he was. Even, you know, we're now into 1966, and they're no longer an R&B band. They've moved on from there, but Brian Jones still had a significant part to play.
Brian Jones' role within the band has long been hotly debated. How important was he to the Stones? What did he bring to the table? And of course, when you had a strong or growing writing team like Mick and Keith, they formed a close bond and began to write more and more songs, which became more important with the latter albums. So you wondered what was Brian's role within the band, and I think that was to introduce new sounds, new instruments, new effects, not just rely on the heavy blues guitar riffing or chordal backing. For example, on Paint It Black, it's Brian that plays the sitar. And when you saw the videos or you saw the Stones live on TV, say at Ready, Steady, Go, you tend to find Brian sitting down and playing some bizarre new instruments. So he was the man who was experimenting. He'd started the group and he was the one that was prepared to push it forward tonally. So he always had a role, an important role, even if he began to feel a little bit left out of what the Stones were doing.
Baby, then I'll fade away. You'll not have to pay for that. Not easy things to come when your whole world is black.
When Paint It Black and all that stuff came out, I think that what I liked about it was the fact that it was like a translation of what we had originally started off doing, but it kind of just took it ahead, you know, which is kind of what I think we were all aiming to do at that time.
You know, by this stage they're on a roll, and there is a classic Rolling Stones sound, and it's there in the grooves.
1966 would become a landmark year in the history of popular music. With a growing youth culture, which would soon stage its own social revolution, came a new direction and ambition from popular artists. Along with the Beatles' Revolver and Dylan's Blonde on Blonde, Paint It Black and the album Aftermath placed the Stones once more at the forefront of musical innovation. The band toured relentlessly for the rest of the year, first in North America and then in Britain. Their final release in 1966 was a new single, Have You Seen Your Mother, Baby, Standing in the Shadow?
Have You Seen Your Mother, Baby, Standing in the Shadows was quite frantic in a way. I think it was quite a rushed performance. Mick Jagger was pushing out the lyrics as fast as he could, and Charlie Watts was pounding away, trying to support him. It wasn't such a big hit for the Stones. It didn't do quite so well in the charts. So obviously when a band is churning out records, you know, who knows whether this was just a particular track that was at the end of a session and they weren't feeling so inspired on that particular day. You can never be sure. But in looking in the context of their release schedule, it was like a little bit of a step backwards for them. It wasn't so confident. It didn't seem to have the edge and the kind of authority of their previous singles. It was good, it was memorable, people love it still, but it wasn't quite vintage Stones.
Have You Seen Your Mother smacked of desperation, because I think the pressure they were under sort of to produce a new single every 2 or 3 months. For example, I mean, it had trumpets on it, which would kind of echo the fact that the Beatles had just used a horn section on Got to Get You Into My Life on Revolver. I don't think it was a particularly strong song under the production. I mean, you know, the impact was fairly strong when you heard it on the radio. It was just one big noise. But when you actually, you know, I think the acid test of a good song is whether it can be reduced to just voice and piano or voice and guitar. And I don't think Have You Seen Your Mother stood up to that. I think, you know, the lyrics were poor. They were just words to sing, really. You know, just to sort of fill up the syllables to make the verses scan. And it failed very badly to get to #1. And I think, you know, that was a bit of a trough as far as the Stones' sort of creativity was concerned.
While the Stones would continue to experiment with musical forms over the following few years, this early period of their music, while they were honing their craft, still resonates today. Unaffected during this time by the horror of Altamont, the drugs busts and Brian Jones' tragic death, the Stones were pioneers in their field, and the music that they created remains monolithic within the history of rock and roll.
There's definitely a fondness for that early period of the Stones. I think they achieved an awful lot in their first 5 years together, a lot that was important. And even if their first 2 albums were mostly covers, it doesn't really matter, I don't think, because as far as the public were concerned, all those songs, those R&B hits, blues tunes, it was all fresh and new anyway, so that was all part of the great discovery, the voyage of discovery that the Stones really launched us all on.